It is my pleasure to call to order the January 14th, 2021 meeting of the Board of the Thompson-Nicola Regional District. The first matter I have is Chair's announcements. And I guess before anything else, I should say Happy New Year to everyone that I haven't had the opportunity to say Happy New Year to yet. The TNRD Library has proudly presented its January to March 21 guide, programs, and activities. And amid the pandemic, everyone's favorite children and teams events, book clubs, author readings, and technology classes are available via Zoom. A copy of the guide is included in your board folder, and more details are available from the library's website. We have upcoming meetings and events. February 2nd to 4th is the Electoral Area Directors Forum and the Local Government Leadership Academy Conference taking place virtually this February. Additional information and agendas will be emailed to you. They'll be emailed, I gather, to those who have expressed interest in attending. And February the 18th is our regular board meeting, and that's to be followed by a committee of the whole meeting on February 19th. You will find today in your blue folders any mail personally addressed to you, board correspondence submitted after the agenda was published, and there's a considerable folder of it, TNRL guide to programs and activities, hard copy of the TNRD regional growth strategy, and a lot of information from Innovate BC, the DER3 follow-up information and promotional material. And that's something that's very welcome and something that we're pretty happy to be able to promote. So, are there any additions to or deletions from the agenda? Hearing none, there are minutes of the regular board meeting from December 17th, 2020. Any discussion? All in favor? Contrary, if any? Carried. We have delegations and invited presentations, starting off with our Member of Parliament, Cathy McLeod.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, directors. And I believe it has probably been a year since I spoke with you last. And of course, you know, what a difference a year makes. I think if we were looking at last year at this time, we might have been a little bit aware of a new virus in China, but at that time, it was being indicated it would be of no or low impact in Canada. And I think, you know, certainly from one of my perspectives, we had just come through an election, and in our area, certainly the forestry crisis was front and center. As we're all aware, in March, of course, things shuttered down very rapidly. So I thought I'd just give a little bit of an update in terms of what's been happening sort of both in the Parliament and in my riding office, and then entertain any comments or questions. So over the sort of late spring, summer, Parliament met a few times to basically deal with emergency legislation. So things like the emergency response benefit, things like the wage subsidy. I will acknowledge they were rolled out very quickly, and certainly we became aware of, you know, over time flaws, especially the flaws in the support for small business, many of who were left out in loopholes. So, you know, I think all of Parliament worked with fairly goodwill to both move those pieces of legislation forward rapidly, but also as we identified issues to try and get most of the issues fixed. I know that there are still some problems, and, you know, certainly I've heard from, you know, throughout the riding in terms of concerns and challenges that still remain. And we haven't had a budget to date. So the federal government mostly focused on those emergency benefits. Its responsibility, of course, was the approval of the vaccines, the authorization, whether it be vaccines, whether it be rapid testing. It is their responsibility, and they were also responsible for procurement. And we'll see how that goes over the upcoming months. Originally it was suggested that the provinces were slow in delivery, but as the provinces ramp up, we might be some concerns with the challenges of the actual flow of the vaccines. But they are, at least, I mean, it is a modern day medicine, amazing in terms of how quickly our scientists were able to develop a vaccine. There was a very prominent group who are the national advisory in terms of the immunizations, and those folks gave suggestions to the provinces, and the different provinces can modify them if they need to. So what's happening next is we did return in September after prorogation in a fairly full format. So we started again dealing with normal issues in Parliament, legislation that the government would introduce above and apart from the emergency legislation. We had a fiscal update. It should be noted there has not been a budget tabled in this Parliament. So I think it's the longest time in the history of Canada that we haven't had a budget tabled. We do, through the fiscal update, know that the deficit will probably be in the $400 billion range. So as I say, when I used to worry at about 27 billion, I guess 400 billion, it seems like a good number to have worried about. Our national debt is now over $1 trillion. I don't think anyone suggested that, we could get it through this without spending dollars. Absolutely. What's going to be more critical is how we move forward. So it is pre-budget time. If there is any suggestions for pre-budget, my submission usually goes in towards the end of January. Certainly the identification of infrastructure remains a high priority. And of course, it's internet. And as Peter Millibar said the other night, he says, we've had successive governments that have made commitments, federal, provincial, and it's amazing that we still haven't got it done. Constituency services, because Service Canada closed down, my team has found themselves to be extraordinarily busy. I was surprised that they weren't deemed an essential service and more local support provided. It was, they had a big telephone number for all of Canada. And so it did create challenges. It was also very challenging to get people home from all over the world, where many were in lockdown. So that was certainly, as I say, a focus of certainly our time over the last few months. In terms of parliamentary responsibilities, as you may be aware, our party has a new leader, and I spent a lot of time previously in Crown Indigenous relationship. I did a short interlude in natural resources, and I am now back as the shadow minister to the Minister for Crown and Indigenous Relations. So I think with that, it's sort of a quick what's been happening in the last year. I would certainly be pleased to open it up for any questions, comments, input in terms of what I need to take back. The House resumes sitting on January 25th.
Thank you, Ms. McLeod. Does anyone have a question for Kathy? You might get off the hook pretty. Oh, Director Singh, thank you.
Well, I just want to express my thanks to Ms. McLeod. As SCM Director, we met with the Conservative BC Caucus, I guess it was about 2 months ago, Kathy, or something like that, but it was a very good conversation around advocacy. And one of the things that did come up there, I think, was that notion of a real appreciation for the Safe Restart funding that's come from the federal government to communities, and also this idea of how we would eventually pay that back and recover out of it. So I mean, there's certainly, I don't think anybody hopes we'll get too much austerity, because we had to put this money in place for the pandemic. But it would be interesting to understand from Ms. McLeod's perspective, what maybe some of the options might be in terms of being able to, sort of financially be sound after the pandemic is behind us.
Thank you, and of course, I think you've asked the big question there. The current government has indicated they believe that they are going to need to spend about $100 billion over a couple of years in terms of supporting the recovery. We're going to have to see what that looks like in a budget. Minority government, there's some people that speculate either with the budget or in the fall there might be another election, and I think the plan, the economy can't afford austerity, but I think effective spending and a bigger plan in terms of how we're going to get back in a robust shape. Certainly this week, part of what I've been doing with our leader is meeting business people from across the country, from Nunavut to Alberta to British Columbia, the forestry industry, the mining, and really hearing their perspective on, because of course they're going to be important drivers of the recovery. So have we a plan that we're putting forward yet? No. Are we waiting to see what the current government proposes? Absolutely.
Are there any other questions for MP McLeod? I think I see Director Sinclair waving.
Thank you, and thank you, Ms. McLeod, for your presentation. I wondered if you could speak to the overdose crisis. Obviously, we're in the middle of a pandemic, and that's we're losing lives, and nobody wants to see that. Concurrently, however, we do have we're losing 5 lives a day just in BC alone to the overdose crisis, and I wondered if you could speak to that federally.
So I do know that there is a special committee that is having a very detailed look. There's all sorts of different strategies, I think, that could be part of the solution. Certainly from my perspective, one of the things we don't talk about as often as we can, and, I hear from parents with desperation that, there's a readiness for making changes in their lives, and the complete absence of support in terms of treatment and moving forward, or if you can't afford $15,000. I know one parent who's put their child through circulation after circulation. So I think you need to tackle it from all angles, but I'm acutely aware of the people that want to try and grapple with their issues, the complete lack of services to help them do it, or the phenomenal expense to them. So I think that's got to be part of the solution.
Thank you. Are there any other questions for MP McLeod? Seeing none, I'll take the opportunity to thank you myself on behalf of the entire board. Ms. McLeod, it was good to hear from you again, and we look forward to hearing from you from time to time during the future as you deem it necessary. We'll certainly make room to welcome you here.
Thank you.
The next matter is a provincial update from MLAs Peter Millibar, Todd Stone, and Jackie Taggart. Welcome.
Thank you. And I think the gentlemen are going to let me go first and fill in the gaps, if you can imagine that I would leave any with the amount that I talk, but I'm going to try and keep it short and succinct today. Congratulations to the chair and vice chair for your election, and Happy New Year to everyone. It's great to be here and great to be back in this role. For those of you who aren't aware, I'm the MLA for Fraser-Nicola. Many of the faces on this screen are familiar, and I am so pleased to be the opposition education critic and doing a lot of work around that. As MP McLeod mentioned, what a difference a year makes. I thought about going into the House last year in February, where our biggest challenge was the protesters on the front of the building. and the fact that we couldn't get in for the throne speech. And we came home for our March break and never went back until the summer. And we did a short summer session, and then in October we had a snap election, and had a short session in December. So lots of exciting things going on despite COVID. And I'd just like to thank the TNRD for the work that they're doing throughout the region to support families and to support communities as we go through COVID. Lots of issues around, support for businesses as we look at the hospitality industry. Lots of requests for a very comprehensive recovery plan coming out of COVID. I think many of us who have small communities are recognizing our moms and pops operations are in crisis. And how do we make sure that the programs provided by both federal and provincial governments are actually getting to the people who need them? And I think that those voices in tandem, your voice and ours at the provincial level, are incredibly important. We've got some exciting things happening in Fraser-Nicola over the last year. Certainly, we continue our work on the Wake Up the Fraser Canyon project in partnership with the Village of Lytton and all the other stakeholders down the corridor. And we are reconnecting with the new ministers and making sure that they're well aware of the project. And we are in the final throes of a tourism master plan for the corridor section between Yale and Lytton, and very excited about the projects and making sure that we have shovel-ready projects for money that is going to become available, I believe, this spring as part of the recovery. Of course, the Ashcroft Terminal is quite an exciting project, and that, when we look at the region, that will bring significant employment opportunities and some challenges around how we house people and how we provide services for them. It's tough in the MLA role to, as in yours, I'm sure, to not be on the road and not be in communities and not be meeting with groups. We miss that. And that's the energy that you get in order to do this job sometimes when you're pretty tired. And I really encourage you all to be in touch, and I'll reach out when needed, because it's our job to keep that enthusiasm and that hope out there for our citizens. It's been a long year, and we've had some incredible tragedies as we look at the death tolls during COVID. And we've got some challenges around what the data is telling us and what kind of services we're providing. And I think we all need to be open to look in a critical way about what we're doing in community and in services provided, and how we can improve that. We've learned a lot during COVID. We sat for two weeks in December, and one bill was on the docket. And I'd be very interested to hear from the TNRD as you take a look at the impact of that bill of delaying the budget for 2 months, what impact that will have on you. I'm sure that you're well aware of the bill being passed. And we asked the questions about the unintended consequences. We've got a lot of organizations that will be affected with the uncertainty of what a 2-month delay in the budget presentation means. Just further to that, I know that Peter and Todd will probably also encourage you to do this, but if there are issues around education in your communities or in your region that you want questions asked at estimates, please feel free to get in touch with me. because that is our opportunity to get answers from the minister. So if you need new schools, if you are concerned about anything that's happening within the education field, our one opportunity to get real answers is during estimates. And I would encourage you to be in touch so that we can make sure that those questions are asked. Other than that, thank you all for the work you're doing. You know, we only have to look south of the border to realize how important democracy is and how important it is that we, the leaders in our communities, share information and ensure that people's voices are heard. So thank you. It's a pleasure to be here today. And if anyone has any questions after Peter and Todd, I'd be glad to answer some.
Thank you, MLA Taggart. Who's next on this panel? Is it going to be Mr. Millibar, or is it going to be Mr. Stone?
It'll be me, Mr. Chair, and thanks for the time today. And Jackie, true to her word, pretty much said everything that needs to be said, so I can be really brief. But thanks again for everyone for having us on these regular visits. I know I've already had a couple of meetings coinciding with Kathy, actually, the last couple of times with some of the area municipalities in my riding, and I look forward to finishing off the next couple that I haven't been to yet. But it's been a good discussion so far, and look forward to, as Jackie said, hearing from you throughout the year as things progress and as projects come online that as a board or as a municipality you need help with. Todd sends his apologies. He had fully intended to be here. His phone has blown up. For those that aren't on Twitter, Todd just recently announced that he will not be seeking the leadership of the BC Liberals today. And the media, the provincial media, have been all over him. So he's been trying to get away from his phone, but it's become a bit of an arduous task. So he wasn't sure if he could sign on late. So I'm going to cover off both ridings today. Essentially, our focus moving forward, as Jackie touched on, will be to continue to seek answers around COVID and those issues, but also to look at the projects in this most recent election that had been committed to by both parties in terms of advancing. And first and foremost will be the commitment around a cancer treatment center in Kamloops, and stay tuned for that. We'll be seeking more answers from the Premier on that in due course, and looking for your help and support and backing to try to move that project forward. I know from past experience, regardless of who's in government, it's a bit of a rock to push up the hill, and we all need to be on the same page moving forward as a broader region to get those much needed health services into our region, much like the commitments around the Ashcroft emergency room and other commitments on healthcare in this region. So both Jackie and Todd and myself will be fully committed to looking into those issues and pressing them forward. Same with highway improvements, same with infrastructure grants and those opportunities. So we'll be keeping an eye out for all of those things moving forward. Previous to the election, we obviously all had different critic roles and roles within our caucus. Post-election, we are obviously not in a minority government situation now. There's a very clear majority, very clear minority. I think everyone in the province understands that it's a 4-year window now of governance, so there's no worry about a snap election in theory. And so, we've restructured how our caucus operates with the change of people. We are down to 28, which is still a good, strong number for an opposition. And I think we can all agree that our democracy is formed around a strong opposition, making sure they're there at any level of government and any political stripe, asking the questions and pressing for answers of policy and legislation moving forward. You heard Jackie is the education critic. Todd is now the jobs and economic recovery critic, which will play a key role. That's the centerpiece of all things COVID recovery. So it'll be a critical piece for our region in terms of tourism recovery and other forms of industry recovery and things moving forward, as well as supports for municipalities and regional districts moving forward. And I've taken on a slightly different role just before the election. About a week before the election, we did a critic shuffle, and I went from environment and climate change to labor. I lasted a week in that, and then the election was called. So I'm now our Indigenous Relations and Reconciliation critic, and Kathy's counterpart federally and provincially, essentially. So we have in the region essentially the same two portfolios in a critic role. So I'm looking forward to working with Kathy moving forward, seeing what we can advance. As I've said to a couple of the councils, I think we all know that a lot of times when it comes to Indigenous issues, you know, it's easy for the province to point to the feds and say, well, they should be doing that, and the feds to point back to the province and say they should be doing that, and nothing ever seems to get done. And so I'm hoping with Kathy and I both with those same portfolios, that'll bring a little strength and temperance to how often that gets used as a deflection mechanism. In addition, I was also appointed as our House leader, and that's a bit of an inside position in terms of caucus. But essentially what it is you have your caucus leader, your party leader, and then your House leader. And the House leader is more or less the number 2 in the depth chart in terms of plotting strategy and questions and how long we'll debate bills in the legislature, and our strategy around question period, and how we'll press the government. So I look forward to that challenge as well, and the voice it can lend for our region at a provincial stage to try to advance the issues that are important to everyone around the table. And with that, I think I'll end it there, and look forward to any questions you might have for Jackie or myself.
Thanks ever so much, Peter. The first question comes from Director Elliott.
Hello, Peter. Happy New Year. When you are in discussions about the cancer clinic, I would wonder if there still is available some statistics that we did when we were looking at the cancer clinic here some, I guess, 25 years ago, maybe. You were still a pretty young man at that time, but your dad certainly was heading up some of that. And just for statistics, I think we have not changed a whole bunch. When you take a look at some of the programs that are already out there, and when you start drawing circles, which is what they did last time, you'll find that the people are going here, there, and everywhere where they weren't 25 years ago. So I'm hoping that you will have some good background in that, so that you can really get our cancer clinic here. And on the other hand, I have just one thing for Todd. I'd like him to take a look at some of the horrendous holes that we have in our infrastructure called highways. Not only number 1 highway, but some of the others, and some of the just access roads. Savannah particularly, you can fall through almost anywhere along the access road. So I wouldn't mind hoping that something could be done about some of that. And just the fact that I'm sure the whole province has some issues with roads. And thank you very much.
Great. Well, thanks, Renee, and I will definitely pass along to Todd the potholes, and that's something that's at this time of year and moving into the spring going to flare up greatly. In terms of the cancer care, you know, in the election, we had as part of our platform 2 linear accelerators in the platform, commitment for that. The Premier then followed that up with the government's commitment. And so we are hopeful that, you know, we can find a way forward to make sure that we do have those radiation treatments in Kamloops, as has been promised essentially by both parties. Because right now there's 5 linear accelerators in Kelowna. They're aging out of service. Almost 2 of those accelerators use is strictly for people from the Kamloops region and up to North Thompson and up towards Williams Lake and the Nicola Valley. So it makes perfect sense if you're replacing them anyways. They should be replaced into Kamloops where the people are coming from anyways. And so that will be our focus. And as I say, you'll see over the next week or so, we'll get some correspondence to you as a board as well as a hospital board, but obviously everyone on this call is on the hospital board as well. Because it will take all of us pushing in the same direction to make sure that these types of commitments are followed through upon in the timeframes that they've been committed as well.
Thank you, Peter. And if you are going to put a committee together to work with you with the cancer thing, I'd be more than happy to volunteer.
Thanks, Peter. And I think you can count on us for such support as we're able to lend in this. We're all keenly interested in seeing that cancer clinic go ahead. Director Quinn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Peter and Jackie, and Happy New Year to you and Todd in absentia. As you know, last year we were promised a meeting for the people of the North Thompson with various ministers on the Little House Warriors. They are still there. They are still performing. Have you any suggestions?
I would say some of the ministers are new. Most actually aren't on this file. The Attorney General still the Attorney General. The Solicitor General still the Solicitor General. Minister of Environment is still the Minister of Environment. New Flinrod Minister, obviously, but I would suggest that we should re-engage and try to move forward with requesting more meetings, and it never hurts if the board wants to fire a letter off, frankly, requesting the same to remind them of the commitment and try to see if we can't get something going. In this day and age of everyone doing everything over Zoom, you would think it would be even easier to try to get a group meeting pulled together than not.
The supplementary, Mr. Chairman, just be really clear, people in our area don't have any problem with people protesting. It's the protesters' behavior. And that's the big issue. Thank you.
Thanks, Director Quinn. Director Singh.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Hello, Jackie and Peter. Great to talk to you. Happy New Year. Really appreciate the work you're doing around rural stability, rural economic development, getting our tourism industry back on track as we come out of the pandemic. The question I had was really for Peter around, and it sort of builds on Dr. Quinn's question a little bit, around Indigenous relations and reconciliation, and the importance of that file for the whole province in terms of understanding UNDRIP, and also it gets confusing sometimes because sometimes within nations there's different points of views, and some people will take up the whole mantle of the whole nation and say, we're standing up in terms of our nation. And so my understanding of Indigenous culture, and it's not as great as many, obviously, but is that sometimes individual people can have that standing within the nation. So it is challenging, and I just wonder about your approach to the critic file and how you're looking at UNDRIP and how you're looking at potentially enabling this relationship so we can actually get past the situation we have a lot of conflict.
Yeah, and thanks for that, Director Singh. And I know, Kathy, federally, they're going through UNDRIP discussions right now in terms of the federal government looking at how they could bring UNDRIP forward. In BC, and if you read through the pages and pages and pages of the debate when the bill first came forward, we were not trying to hold UNDRIP up. We wanted to make sure it got the thorough vetting because it is a massively important document moving forward for this province. It did ultimately pass unanimously in the House, but we wanted to understand where the government's mindset was moving forward, because that will frankly frame a lot of the discussion that will inevitably wind up in court decisions as people try to figure out how this truly does impact things on the ground. The fundamental pieces of UNDRIP, though, that are important, I think, for everyone to remember is that it does not create a veto. It's Section 35 of the Constitution still overrides, and it still speaks to prior and informed consent. But there is still a precedent within the Supreme Court system dealing with that. Certainly, Minister Rankin and myself, we've had a conversation, and this is one of those files where, because it is so complicated within the how each nation actually operates, it's going to be a case-by-case basis, and there's going to be times that the province really is not carrying their weight as relates to UNDRIP and their responsibilities for what they have now added to themselves. And I will have no problem holding the government to account for that, and legitimately so. And there's other times where we are all going to have to work together to try to advance the needle forward and make sure that it's being implemented the way it was intended to be implemented when it was first passed. Case in point is the legislation Jackie was talking about in the House, which will delay budgets by 2 months in the province. It will actually result in a budget not being presented until we're already a month into the new fiscal year. there was no consultation with First Nations on that bill. UNDRIP legislation that was passed in BC says all legislation needs to have consultation. The government's response when we asked about that was that it was not impacting First Nations, so they're to any great degree, so they did not have to consult. So we are trying to work through and figure out what exactly the government's expectation is, because that's the number one thing I hear from local leadership and leadership around the province is a confusion around what UNDRIP it really will mean in practice on the ground. And we need to get clarity around how the government is interpreting their own legislation in practice over what people's expectations are.
I know we have a long meeting. I just want to say, Peter, congratulations on the House Leader job. It's serve with you here and at the council, and it's a great feather for our cap, and you're a great guy for the job. And thank you, Jackie, for work as caucus chair for Liberals in the past Parliament. Really appreciate that.
Does anyone else have a question for MLA Millivar? Director Rice.
Thank you. I put my little hand up there on the side there, but anyways, Happy New Year, and thanks Jackie, Peter, and Kathy for being here today and stuff like that. And up close and personal, the last couple of months I've got with the mental health crisis which COVID has created in across Canada and across the world, I guess. And dealing with the frontline people who are magnificent people, don't get me wrong, but at our hospital board meeting, when the biggest shortage of staffing was the psychiatrists were 6 short, according to the hospital board meeting, it really concerns me because this, you know, if I didn't get up close and personal to it, I wouldn't really know this, but in talking to some of those frontline people, I think we're struggling a bit to deal with the communication and also the resources to deal with this. And then unfortunately, on the other side of the spectrum, my mom, who is now in the hospital and may not be coming out, I found out yesterday and talking with the doctor yesterday, these are heroes for sure. But she says, I got to go now. You know, I got 17 people in the hospital with COVID and or whatever, 17 beds. And I can't really, you know, so I just want everybody to be aware that this crisis is going to get worse before it's going to get better. And I don't have any answers. And I hope to sit down and talk with Ken a little bit about it. But I just I had to say something because I don't know, I'm just really a little bit emotional today because I found out this news yesterday anyways. And I just had to bring it up as an awareness thing. I don't have any brilliant solutions or anything. And I wanted to applaud the frontline workers when I had a chance and say, but I still think, you know, that with the staffing shortages and what's going on with the spikes and there's no end date for COVID, I think it's something we really need to, you know, sort of focus on. And I don't know enough about it, but I just wanted to throw that out there to Jackie and Peter and Kathy while I had a chance. Thank you.
I'll just make a comment in regards to, thanks, Stephen, and so sorry to hear about your mom. You know, I think that we had great expectations that we were going to flip over the page from 2020 to 2021 and everything was going to be better. And everything that I'm reading and hearing from people on the front line is that we've got some tough times to go through before we see better. And we don't want to take away people's hope, but we certainly want to be real about it. As we, you know, as someone who's single and lives in isolation, I like myself, but not that much. It's, you know, it is a long slog for people. And the outreach and the support from mental health is critical, but they're overworked just like everyone else on the front lines. And I think as leaders, we have a job to make sure that we support and advocate on behalf of those people and that government hears the real story, the frontline story, not the story about numbers, but the story about people. And so thanks very much, Stephen, for bringing that up. And I assure you that we are advocating daily on behalf of those who are giving way above and beyond.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Jackie. Are there any other questions for Peter or Jackie for that matter? I don't see any other hands. If there's any out there in Zoom land, please speak, because I can't see any hands. So I will take the opportunity then to thank the three of you, Peter, Kathy, and indeed Jackie, for having taken the time to be with us. These meetings are really important for us, and it's a wonderful opportunity to have you here to tell us what's going on and to give us the opportunity to ask questions and make suggestions. So on behalf of the entire board, I thank you for your time today, and best wishes to Todd. I hope his telephone recovers soon. The next matter on our agenda is unfinished business, and the first item of unfinished business is the Stump Lake Ranch commercial traffic on Highway 5A. Director Elliott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I have a motion I'd like to present, if I can get a seconder. And I move that we defer our decision on the issue until we have had time to hear from Commercial Vehicle Safety and Enhancement and the Ministry of Transportation.
I'll second that. Moved and seconded. I expect there might be some discussion on that, but I have, Director Quinn, I noticed that. I have a keen interest in this myself, and I think because I have some information that I uncovered in the last 3 or 4 days that I try not to do any speaking from the chair, but on this occasion I will. In the first place, this highway runs through my area. I share it with Director Laird. And in the second place, I do have something of a background in the motor transportation industry. So I'm going to go ahead and say that I'm very, very concerned that we'll jump aboard this particular bandwagon without having possession of all the facts. And I'm also very concerned that the information we received to this point has either been based on emotion and not fact in terms of a number of the letters we received, or it's simply not reliable. And I'll start with Mr. Price, and I'll almost finish, I think, with Mr. Price's presentation. And because statistics absent any context are really worthless. And Director Graham asked for context in terms of overall increase and decrease in accidents, and Mr. Price was unable to answer that. And any discussion of accident numbers involving a specific group like heavy transport vehicles must include numbers detailing at-fault accidents, and there was no information, and in the absence of any knowledge as to how many of these commercial vehicles were at fault in these accidents, the numbers don't really have much relevance. Mr. Price said repeatedly, the numbers don't lie. And I'm sorry, but the numbers are capable of lying. Mr. Price brushed off my question about the commercial vehicle safety and enforcement people, and I expect that's because they didn't agree with him. They didn't support the initiative to ban trucks from Highway 5A. And I spoke at length with the head of CVSE, a gentleman by the name of Glenn Taylor. He disputed the 9% increase in accidents that Mr. Price said had occurred since 2013, but he did agree that the numbers could show that kind of an increase or even a greater increase because the number of accidents is very, very low on Highway 5A. And if you had one more accident 1 year over another, that could skew the numbers far more than a mere 9%. So we didn't have any information. Mr. Price mentioned 2018. I don't know what became of 2016 and 2017. And I'll come back to that in a minute. Mr. Price had no conversations, none, with truckers or trucking companies yet he claimed to be knowledgeable about why they use Highway 5A. He said there's no other situation like this in the province where one road runs parallel to another. And I would point out that there are many routes parallel to Highway 1 right throughout the Fraser Valley, namely Highway 7, the low heat highway on the north side. And more significantly, we have Highway 1, Kamloops to Hope, or vice versa, as an alternative to the entire length of the Coquihalla Highway. And I think that's what Director Elliott was driving at when she suggested there was a parallel road from Cache Creek to Kamloops. I wish she had said from Hope to Kamloops. And I can simply say from my own personal experience that I've many, many times have come to the point of making a decision either west of Kamloops when I was heading toward Vancouver, or at Hope when I was heading toward Kamloops. What am I going to do here? And more times than not, I've chosen to take the Fraser Canyon. And I've done the same sort of thing when coming out of Merritt with respect to Highway 5A, not to save fuel. And on many of those occasions, I was being paid by the mile, so it was actually costing me to do that. But the Coquihalla Highway, in my view, is highly truck unfriendly. So Mr. Taylor, the head of the CVSE, said, with Mr. Price said that Cardew Hill is used Sundays as a staging area for trucks to get in place. This is a direct quote, to go to work first thing Monday morning. And Mr. Taylor said, and I'm quoting him directly, "I don't know what he's talking about." And he further said he'd never heard of such a thing. He said there was no info from Commercial Vehicle Safety and Enforcement because, quote, a direct quote, "they're not allowed to speak." And Mr. Taylor denies that. And he is the one person that I know of that Mr. Price spoke to. And I phoned both weigh scales and nobody had heard from Mr. Price. But Mr. Taylor, the head of CVSE, has denied that they're not allowed to speak. And he said, in fact, that he would welcome the opportunity to come and speak to us. And that's, I'm relating this to Director Elliott's motion. There's no reason that he can't come and speak to us, and he's indicated that he has a keen interest in doing so. He said the roadbed was never designed for today's heavy load. I spoke to Mr. Folk, the area manager for Ministry of Transportation, and he talked to me for half an hour yesterday, and he flatly denied that. He said that any weak areas in the roadbed have been upgraded, and that most of that happened at the time they were being resurfaced. So rather than just pave over a problem, they rebuilt the roadbed and then paved over the problem. Mr. Price said, in referring to, and I like this, that he referred to holes in the road, said, quote, "it looks like the moon sometimes when you drive it in the spring," close quote. And to me, that goes far beyond hyperbole. I drove the road today. I drove the road the day before yesterday. The road surface is excellent from end to end. Just this side of Knutsford, there are some potholes, but trucks don't make potholes anyway. MOTI has done extensive investigations into what causes potholes, and it isn't heavy loads and trucks. I think Director Stamer will know that. The road surface, as I say, is excellent, but what more importantly, there was no evidence whatsoever of a multiplicity of patches having been applied over the last year or so. With respect to environmental concerns, he said there was irreparable damage, close quote, when a truck crashes. In numerous trips over Highway 5A today, 2 days ago, and all summer, I have seen no evidence of this irreparable damage. So my information is that by using Highway 5A for its chip haul, and I didn't get this from Arrow, I got this indirectly, Arrow Transportation saves $40,000 annually in fuel costs. But nobody has mentioned, in this alleged concern for the environment, that lower fuel use means lower emissions into our airshed. Mr. Price presented letters. 30% of them came from the Douglas Lake Cattle Company, and I think if anybody has read the court proceedings, we know that the Douglas Lake Cattle Company is not exactly famous for sharing public assets with the public. Other letters, and there's been a recent blizzard of them, which indicates a letter writing campaign has been initiated. I spoke to 3 Knutsford ranchers who opposed this initiative, but only one had written to us. He did raise a very good point, however, and it was a concern to him. He said, be careful what you wish for, because if Highway 5A is downgraded, so too will its priority for maintenance to the present standard, summer and winter. So I don't want to go on any longer other than to say that I accumulated about 2 million miles, not kilometers, miles behind the wheel of a heavy truck while Mr. Price was behind a microphone. And my long discussions with Glenn Taylor of CVSE and with Mr. Folk of MOTI were, I hope, productive. Mr. Taylor and I spent quite a bit of our time discussing commercial vehicle safety and drivers in particular. And with respect to Highway 5A, they both say that the accident rate is not at all significant when compared to similar highways throughout the province. It's not above normal. I think it was Mr. Folk who said that nothing jumps off the page about Highway 5A. Mr. Taylor spoke to me about a program, the abbreviation for which is MELT, Mandatory Entry-Level Training, now in effect in Ontario, and one his department is urging British Columbia to adopt. And this gets me really to my point, and this is what I hope the board will do. I hope the board will take the initiative at some point to work with the various ministries and do something constructive, or try to do something constructive about the serious decline in the quality of drivers, because there's no doubt that there is absolutely outrageous and despicable behavior on the part of truck drivers on our highways. I would be the last person to deny that. But the solution is not to ban trucks from this highway, that highway, or another. I think as far as this particular initiative that we're discussing today, it's probably bound to fail anyway. And one director suggested to me he would vote in favor of it because it didn't matter. Because, but I urge you not to support it, at least not yet. Both Mr. Taylor and Mr. Folk have offered to present to us on the facts about Highway 5A and about the state of commercial vehicle safety throughout the province. And it's been going on for many, many years, this particular discussion over Highway 5A. There's no special urgency to it. So I would hope that that you take advantage of the opportunity to be apprised of all the facts before we jump into a decision on this. I've spoken to Ms. Campbell. She says we've already got 2 delegations for February, but both of these gentlemen, I'm sure, would be available to speak to us in March. And I think it's absolutely imperative that we should hear them and then decide whether or not to send a letter of support. As I said, there's no particular urgency to it. It's been going on for years and years and years. So that's all I have to say on the topic. Is there anybody else who wishes to speak to it? Director Elliott's motion. Director Quinn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think it might also be appropriate to invite the RCMP who do the enforcement as well as CSVE. Is that appropriate? Is that a friendly thing? Do you need a?
No, I see no reason why not. Director Elliott, would you add RCMP to that? And RCMP.
And RCMP.
Okay, thanks.
Have we got everybody in there?
Director Rothenberger.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I don't have any objection at all to looking for additional information from the trucking industry. I do hope, though, that we'll keep an open mind on this. I don't think it's helpful to refer to letter writing campaigns in what sounds like a negative way, as if it's just opinions that might not be sincere. I don't doubt the sincerity of all of those letter writers whatsoever. And I don't think we should either. I don't think we should make references to Mr. Price being parked behind a microphone for however many years he was in this context. I don't think we should have already made up our minds, Mr. Chair, what you appear to have done by urging us not to support the request. Let's receive the information and then stack up that information beside what we've already received from the many residents along that route who are sincerely concerned about the safety of that route, and then make our decision. Let's not jump to our decision right now. Let's wait for that information and then do it. And I don't think you presented it in a way that enhances that. Thank you.
Yeah, I agree with you, Director Rothenberger, that we should wait until we're in possession of all the facts. I also agree with you that I have no question whatsoever about the sincerity of the letters that we have received. I'm not sure that I'm not prepared to jump to the conclusion that they're necessarily based in fact, but I think all the people were sincere in expressing their concerns, and I don't doubt that for a moment. Director Brown?
I want to start by just saying I agree with the issues of highway safety, but I completely disagree with the solution. And the City of Merritt has been basically lobbying the Ministry of Transportation and ICBC for driver safety for at least 5 years. We have 5 highways surrounding our area. And we have all of these same issues on all of our highways. It's not just between Merritt and Kamloops on the old highway. That highway has been used by City of Merritt residents with trucks forever, even before it was paved. Our residents still continue to use that road. Some of them are really bad drivers and some of them aren't. And the city has taken the position that we're looking at fixing the bad driver issue through better training, through better certification, through perhaps reduction of speed limits in some areas, widening of the road where it needs to be. But to just out and out ban vehicles from the highway doesn't make sense. One of the things we also want to do is when drivers do break the rules, fine them. And there needs to be a fine much greater than a fine just for the average car or truck. It needs to be a whole lot bigger. Hit these truckers in the pocketbook when they override the rules. But please don't just ban them. As Chair Gillis had mentioned, the Douglas Lake issue, it's been a longstanding issue with being denied access to public lakes in that area. And the tension with our citizens right now over loss of another public property access has just been heightened at this point. So let's look at some of the issues, but let's look at all of the issues, and the solution, in my mind, needs to be something other than banning of the big trucks. Thanks.
Thanks, Director Brown. Director Schaefer?
I'd just like to say that I agree that we should investigate further, because Highway 24 is just as bad as Highway 5A as far as I can figure out. And I don't blame the highway. I blame the drivers that we have out there today. And I think something should be done, better education, better licensing or something from that end. I'd also like to have ICBC involved in it as well for information. They don't have to come to the meeting, but if we can get information of all accidents, not just highway trucks.
Thanks, Director Schaefer. I can tell you that my information is that the RCMP, gee, I should have my notes. The RCMP and ICBC do share that information. Mr. Folk told me that he would be bringing current or as current as possible statistics. Some of the ones that were missing a month ago. And I can assure you that Mr. Taylor is going to have a lot to say about driver training and driver safety. Director Laird.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I've lived around that highway ever since I moved to Merritt. In fact, when I did move to Merritt, it was the only access from Kamloops to Merritt. My concern is, along with the chair, is that it's basically the driver training and some of the truck drivers, the way they drive those big rigs down the road. I had an experience just last week, as a matter of fact, because I live I turn off at Monk Park Road. We have the Nicola stretch, we call it. I was doing 90 kilometers an hour, which is the speed limit. I had a very large semi come right up behind me. You could probably count the bugs on his grill. And then he passed me. And what I usually do when I travel that road is when there's a big truck comes up behind me, I always look for a safe spot to pull over to the side and let him go by, because I don't want to be involved in a trucking accident. Now, and I think the concern is the ability of and how truckers drive their trucks down that road. And I agree that we need to have more information. And I'd also like to have all of the letters that are been presented to the board go forward to both Highways Minister and the other ministries that are being asked to speak, because I think there's we need some answers for the questions that are been presented and the concerns of the people that live on that road. And it basically lays out how most people feel as far as safety on that road is concerned. And I don't feel that there's too much wrong with the highway. You just have to drive according to conditions. So I support the motion to get more information, and then we can make a decision. Thank you.
Thanks, Director Laird. Is there anyone else who wishes to speak to Director Elliott's motion? Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed, if any? It's carried. Takes us to the Heffley Creek Community Association letter of support for ballasted wake boat ban. Director Rothenberger, sorry, I couldn't see you. Sometimes I don't see you outside the corner.
Okay,
there.
I'm way in the back here. I would move that we support the request from the Heffley Lake Community Association.
I'd like to.
Moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed, if any? It's carried. Revenue anticipation bylaw. There are two recommendations. Moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? All in favor? Opposed, if any? It's carried. Moved by Director Schaefer. Director Chris, did you second? Thank you. Is there any discussion? All in favor? Opposed, if any? It's carried. City of Merritt issuing bylaw. There is a recommendation. There are two, actually.
Move number one.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? All in favor? Opposed, if any? It's carried.
Move number two.
Moved and seconded. Is there any discussion of recommendation two? Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed, if any? It's carried. Temporary use permit number 47, respecting 2581 Aberdeen Road, Lower Nicola. Moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? All in favor? Opposed, if any? It's carried. This takes us to the Agricultural Land Commission application ALR 174. I think.
Move the recommendation.
Moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? All in favor? Opposed, if any? It's carried. Takes us to reports. And now we have the long deferred state of the organization report from our CAO, Mr. Hildebrand.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate that.
I noticed you got it far enough up on the agenda today that
Yeah, we took some advice and made a change. So we're just going to get the presentation pulled up. One to the left. Good. It looks like we're good to go. Everyone can see that on Zoom, I assume. So thanks again, Mr. Chair, and to the good afternoon Board of Directors. This is a presentation that is new for our organization and something we plan on delivering annually in December and hopefully not deferred to January. I think the state of the organization is important to ensure the board is aware of our ever-changing team and how we continue to grow. In order to be an effective organization, we need to always be reviewing and checking in on the health of our organization with respect to our people, and reviewing the strategies, initiatives that we have planned that will allow us to grow and better execute. The board and our entire staff team need to be very aware of the part that they play in the success and growth of our organization, and we need to work together. This is certainly a people business, whether it's dealing with our citizens, doing business, interacting with stakeholders or partners, or simply having a conversation with a staff member. It's all about people. A few months back during my interview for this role, I talked a lot about 3 important items, that being people, execution, and growth. In my experience in both private business and local government, I was quick to learn that without a good team around you, you would struggle to be successful long term. The great news is that we do have a very solid team and a very dedicated team. The challenge will be how we communicate, how we manage, train, develop, and recognize our staff. So that said, we need to understand where we are before we can decide where we're going. So I'm going to start off the presentation by taking you through the TNRD profile and share some high-level demographics. I will then pass it over to Debbie, who's going to tag team this presentation with me to review some more details about our organization, and more importantly, what we're going to do in 2021. So the number of employees in the organization has been relatively stable since 2016, with a few staff being added in to the group covered by CUPE. Between 2015 and 2016, a few positions were added to the organization, primarily in our library department and our non-union group. Some examples of those were communications manager, tech services manager, and a safety coordinator. We have 3 core groups, as you can see on the screen, with BCGEU making up over half of the organization, with 100 of our 190 employees. Both library and IT belong to that group. Our CUPE team members represent just over 25% of our organization, and our exempt employee team consists of the management, but also includes some key technical positions such as safety, payroll, and HR. The organization is very female dominant, which with this being driven primarily from demographics in our library system, which I mentioned is our largest employee base. With the library system excluded, our male-female distribution would be quite balanced. Over the last 5 years or so, the diversity in the library has actually grown, with more males showing interest in this field and applying and getting hired. A quick fun fact, our senior management team, as you all know, is myself and 8 directors, and this team is 55% female and 45% male. This isn't typical from my experience in local government, but I can tell you it's a great combination and has been working very well. We have a great team all around us with great perspective, focus, and experience. And now I'm going to pass it over to Debbie to continue some of the details.
Thank you, Scott. The first thing I'll do is just dive a little deeper into our age and service. So if you can take us to the next slide. Thank you. So the chart that you're looking at right now shows you how the ages are distributed in the organization. So what you can see on the screen is how the age is grouped by the different groupings. So the green bar is BCGEU, the blue bar is CUPE, and then the gray bar is the non-union group. And then that yellow line that you can see, that's everyone all together. And I think the important thing to take out of this one, first off, is looking at that yellow line, and what you can see from that is a majority of our staff are in that 40 to 50 age category. And when you think about our organization, that actually makes sense because most of our positions are those professional or technical positions that require some education and some experience. And so we tend to have people that are mid-career, not necessarily entry-level type positions. So that would make sense about where a majority of our staff are sitting. I think one of the things though that, one of the fun facts for me when I looked at this was actually that big group of under 30s in our CUPE group. That's new for us. I think we've had some new hires come in, and the new hires that we've had in that CUPE group have tended to be in the younger age category. So we have a really nice mix in our CUPE group. You can see there's quite a good distribution when you look at that blue bar there of, similar numbers of people in the different age categories. However, one of the risk areas that jumped out at me when I started looking at this is on the non-union side, and that's the gray bar, where you can see that we have a significant number of people, and more than the average in the organization for sure, in those higher age groups. And particularly if you look at the 50 to 60 category. And why we need to really pay attention to that is because those are the people that are nearing our retirement. So this, oh, no, if you can go back one, thank you. So in looking at retirement in particular, then, if that's an area of risk for us, we started to look at this information. So if you look at this graph, what it's showing you is the blue bar shows you the average age that people tend to, or the average age in the organization, sorry. And the green bar is the average service that people have. So the first on the left side, that's CUPE. And then the red bar is how old are people usually when they retire in CUPE, and how much service do they have? And then you can see we've done that for each group, CUPE, BCGEU, and management. And the good thing about this is you can see that the ages of current staff and where they typically retire, the staff are not yet at that retirement age in those groups. So what that tells us is that we have people that are probably fairly early on in their tenure with us, and they're not ready to retire. The one area again, though, that we need to pay attention to is our non-union group. And that is a group where we know we do have some issues. And so we can't just look at the data and just accept the data as is. We have to really understand it, because whenever you have small groups, and our management is a small group, there's only, about 27 people. It doesn't take very many, you can have quick deviations, 2 people out of a group of, 25 is almost 10%. So I just want to have that caution there. When we looked at retirement age and service, one of the things we did do a deeper dive on, knowing that we had an older contingent in our union group, was to actually look at specific jobs or people where they were potentially nearing retirement, and we had some risk areas. And sure enough, we do have some risk areas. And one of the ones I want to highlight for you is on our senior management team. And a fact for our senior management team is 50% of our senior management team could retire today. They are of an age that they could, they're eligible essentially for their pension. So that is a risk area for us that we have to pay attention to. We have to understand then what are people's plans, because that would not be a great place for this organization if 50% of our team opted to retire in a quick succession. So let's move from retirement now into labor relations. And so this next slide shows you grievances that we receive per year. The blue bars that you can see are for the BCGEU group, and then green is CUPE. And I've done this for you so you can see how many grievances we have received per year. And I think what you can take from this, just when you look at it as an overall, generally labor relations are pretty stable in our organization. And, you know, with the exception of 2020, BCGEU was pretty active last year. You know, we sometimes only receive, like from CUPE in particular, one grievance a year if we've, you know, had a year like in 2018 where we didn't get any grievances. And so I think, you know, what that does show is that, you know, there's relative stability in our organization, which is really good to see. And while we see more grievances with the BCGEU, that's understandable because, of course, as Scott mentioned, the BCGEU has the highest number of employees in that group. So, you know, you would expect to see more grievances. So I think how many grievances we get is just one way to look at it. That just, you know, tells us one story, but actually I believe that how the grievances are resolved is a much better, gives you much better oversight of the labor relations in the organization. So since I came on board, I took a look back on everything since 2012. And what this is showing you is how the grievances that were received actually got resolved. And I'm quite proud of the fact that, you know, over the last 8 years, only one grievance, and that was with CUPE, actually went to arbitration. And for that grievance, in fact, the TNRD was successful. And so not only did we go to arbitration, but we were the successful party in that arbitration. So the other, I think, really important things to take from this picture of it is how many grievances the unions just dropped, you know, at some point in the process. Because the union doesn't, you know, choose which grievances or to grieve. Often it's usually the employee that wants to grieve, but then the union will make the decision along the way as to whether or not they'll proceed or whether there's a basis to proceed. So you can see that a majority of them actually get dropped. The other big, you know, where you can see the other bars where they're most, where it's a higher number as well, is where there's a joint settlement. And again, I really like to see that as well, because what that means to us is that the parties came together and agreed to resolve the situation in an interest way, in that we came to a resolution that we both thought was a good resolution. Because having grievances is not a bad thing. It can highlight an issue, something you need to fix. The parties work together, they fix it, and you move on. So this to me is I think a better depiction of our labor relations in the organization, as opposed to just simply how many grievances we get. And looking at this, you know, when I looked at the data itself, you know, historically about 85% of the grievances that come through are either dropped by the union because they're not valid, or we've resolved them together. So that to me, I thought spoke well for both parties in the organization, right? Not just the organization, but also our union partners as well. So that's our labor relations. So now I'd like to go to turnover. And it's a little difficult to find turnover data for Canada in general. Census Canada doesn't provide that kind of information, but I was able to find a recent Mercer's study, because I wanted to give you a sense first off, you know, what does turnover look like out there generally, so that we can start comparing ourselves to say, well, is our turnover, you know, higher or lower? So you can see that based on the Mercer's study that was done, you know, on average, organizations experience about 12% voluntary turnover. Now, you know, you have to just look at that as being a very big number, a big aggregate number, but it just gives us a ballpark anyways. So if we go to the next slide, we can actually look at ourselves. And so over the past 5 years, you can see that, you know, we fluctuate. It can, you know, we've got lows and then sometimes we've got highs. And again, sometimes when you're dealing with small numbers, small groups, you can easily have big deviations. If you have a group of, you know, 25 people and you have 3 people who leave, that's, you know, more than 10%. So, but I think it's still important for us to look at this, to look at our overall turnover, and to be aware of, you know, if we've got any particular groups that are anomalies. I think those are important to pay attention to. And, you know, if we look at 2018, for example, and you can see that was one of our highest years and it was in the BCGEU. Well, you know, that made sense for us because we knew that that was the year that the library did a complete restructure and a number of our staff opted to retire or not stay. So, you know, that made sense to us. So I think, but a deeper dive into turnover, I think, is important. And so, oh, we can skip this one. Let's go to the next one. Yeah, thank you. A deeper dive is important so that we understand not just how many people are leaving, but also the purpose or the reason that they're leaving us. And sometimes, as you can see in this, this slide here, you know, it's not always the employee leaving us, but sometimes we sever the relationship ourselves. So what you can see on this slide is a comparison of the two groups, CUPE and BCGEU, and you can see the various years there in the colors. So that's taking us from 2015 to 2020, with green being the 2015 and then whatever, dark blue, I think, being 2020. And then that overall turnover is broken out by, was it voluntary that the employee left? Was it involuntary and that we severed the employment, or did they retire? And so that, I think, starts to become, you know, as important as how many people are leaving. So the non-union group is the next one. Quite a stable group, as you can see. They don't, you know, there's not a lot of turnover in our non-union group. And as you can see by this graph, majority of our turnover actually in our non-union group is retirement, you know, or we opt to sever the relationship as often as people are leaving us. So that's the kind of the takeaway from looking at the union or the non-union group. The next piece to look at, I think, to look at the health of the organization is really our absenteeism rate. Now, on the right-hand slide of this data, you can see what the Census Canada data is, because they do gather this information so that we can see what Census Canada can provide to us. Now, what I was able to find was the data from 2019, and they provide the census data from Kelowna, which is the closest community I could find to Kamloops, for this information. So you can see that on average, it's just over 4% absenteeism rate generally. And so our absenteeism rates for our different groups, I think, you know, are pretty close to the average, or in fact, even under. So I think that's actually a good sign for our organization that, you know, the general health of our organization is really good. In 2018, we put in an attendance support program, and that is a relationship conversation-based type of program. We're very supportive of any employee that is having issues with their attendance, and that program has been a very it's done a really good job. It's really supported employees. It reduced our absenteeism. It has encouraged people to be at work. And so it's definitely been a positive program that we've put into place. So then the next thing Scott and I wanted to ensure we talked to you about was, okay, so we know all of this information. How does that relate to the HR strategies and some of the work that we're actually doing within the organization and within HR? So one of the things I want to just give you a bit of background on is in 2012 and 2013, I undertook a project in the organization to develop an HR strategy. And I started by talking to all the staff to say, well, what does it feel like to work here? Like, what's the culture of this organization? And I heard the same words over and over. It didn't matter whether it was management, whether it was frontline, whether it was in the library or out in the field. I got the same words. And these were, we strive for excellence. We have challenging work. Public service is important to us. We're a team here. Everyone is supportive. We're flexible. And so from those descriptive words about what it felt like to work at the TNRD, I pulled together a working group and we came up with a statement that essentially describes the culture of our organization. And that's what you see up there about working together. We provide exceptional public service in a supportive, flexible environment. And that's where I started my work on the HR strategy. So it's not just nice words. They are nice words, but they're more than that. They actually drive what we do. And so when we're recruiting, those are the questions we ask candidates. We ask them about teamwork and we ask them about, being supportive and being flexible and, do they like public service and things like that. So that's how these words and that statement start to play into the HR strategy we have in place. It links to our performance management program. And those are the competencies that our staff assess themselves on and that we assess them on. It's forming the basis of the recognition program work that we've done over 2020 that will be rolling out into 2021. And it will also form the training and development and succession planning work that we're going to be looking at for 2021. So one of the things I did most recently, again, pulling together an employee group, because I'm big on getting the input from the staff, was really, are these words still relevant? And they are still relevant. The working group we had on employee recognition said, yes, that all makes sense. And we want the program to be based on that. So when we're talking about recognition, we have a long history of recognizing staff or, in having fun. We've had semi-annual barbecues where we have a barbecue down at the shop and people can come down for hot dogs and chips. And we have when we can get together, we'll have a Christmas event down there where we do kind of a crazy white elephant gift snatch from each other. So that's all recognition and that's all supporting the culture that we have. We also do our formalized long service awards. And as you know, we recently did a video to recognize our employees because we couldn't get people together for the regular event. So the one thing that we do want to put in place in 2021 is just more of a formalized way to do recognition and particularly to encourage peer-to-peer recognition, which is a bit of a gap in our organization according to the feedback from staff. So the next thing we'll look at is our succession planning and development. That's as I highlighted, we do have risk areas, particularly in our non-union group. And so, we do want to pay attention to succession planning. Now, one of the things I will just highlight for you here is that succession planning doesn't necessarily mean that we can always grow our own and promote from within. We are not the size that we can necessarily have multiple levels in the organization. So succession planning and having a strategy can also mean, how do you do knowledge transfer so that the person that's retiring, for example, you can get all that knowledge from them before they leave, so that the next person coming in can kind of pick up easily from that person, and you're not just losing all that knowledge when someone leaves. I think what does speak well for our organization, though, historically, is that where we have been able to, we have grown our own managers. And as you can see there, 27% of our current management team actually has been promoted from within. So I think that speaks well for our history. We also invest in our staff when it comes to training and development. And as you can see by this graph, in 2019, our investment was over $100,000 in training and development for our staff. As I mentioned, we have a lot of staff that are professional and very technical, and so it's necessary to keep their skills up. I won't go into the different kind of distribution of where that money goes, but I think you can see just from the list that it's widely accessed by multiple departments, which is really good to see. Okay, I'll move on to the wellness program now. Part of our objective for 2020 was to, again, look at the health of the organization and to put a formalized wellness program in. And so we have regular lunch and learns. We can't do them in person anymore, so we're doing them by Zoom, and we bring in guest speakers over the lunch hour, or internal staff will do something. So those are quite popular. And then we're putting in a formal mental health program called Not Myself Today that I think Priscilla, I think we had something here for this group. I can't remember now if we did that or not. No. Yeah, okay. So I'll give you a bit more information then. The Not Myself Today program is simply a way to be able to talk about mental health. There's a lot of resources now for managers, and Priscilla, our safety person, is in the process of getting ambassadors in the organization that want to communicate and get this program underway. And what I was absolutely thrilled about was we had over 20 people 20 staff step forward and say they wanted to be ambassadors for this program. So that I think is great. The other thing I'll just highlight for you is our internal communication, because it does speak to our culture and it does have a peer-to-peer recognition embedded in it. And Jostle is our internal communication tool where we communicate information out to all of our staff. It also allows you to put a profile up there so that you can say a little bit about yourself and what you do and your hobbies and things like that, as a way to have staff just get to know each other a little bit more. And it does have a way where you can do shout outs to people that have done something, and it's getting used quite frequently, so people can get recognized for doing something, and it's a lot of fun, actually, this new program that we have in place. I'll now just speak a little bit about COVID and our response to COVID, because it continues to consume time and resources within our organization. So we watch this on a regular basis. We're continually making adjustments. We are regularly monitoring all the public health directives, and we take action on those. We have staff who are working from home, either kind of more on a full-time basis or more often on a partial basis, where they're part at home and part in. Our whole objective with that one was to try to reduce the number of staff that were in the office at any one time. And so far we've been, quite successful. Interesting, I was listening to the news, and they were talking about the reduction in the number of colds and just general flus this year. And sure enough, we've seen the same thing where, you don't hear the same cold and flu sniffles and coughs, and everyone's so paranoid about coming into work. Heaven forbid if you're sniffling right now. So we're really paying attention to this with increased sanitation and all of that important. We also have that cross-functional task force that meets on a regular basis to look at what's happening and make adjustments in the organization. So knock on wood, we have not had any confirmed COVID cases or exposures in our organization, and we hope to keep it that way. But if we do, we already have a plan in place in terms of how that will be addressed. So with that, I'm going to pass it back to Scott.
Thank you, Debbie. In closing, I hope this information and the details provided to you both provide you an update and perhaps a new perspective on our people operations and how we want to move forward in a progressive and collaborative way. Everything we do as an organization, for the most part, needs to have a link or a connection to our strategic plan and the goals and objectives we set, and we did talk a little bit about that recently. So I also want to make that link with the state of the organization presentation. In reviewing our existing strategic plan, I felt there was a real opportunity to focus more on people and relationships, specifically on our team. Don't get me wrong, I think we have a great team from what I have seen over the last 5 months. It's been nothing but outstanding with respect to team's passion and dedication to our regional district. We certainly delivered on many priorities and initiatives in the past and did some great work, and I want this to continue. I know our proposed key focus areas in our new strategic plan, which you're going to see next month or very soon here. We talk a lot about strategic relationships and partnerships and dynamic communication and branding. So those will play a large part. I feel we need to continue to ramp up our focus and attention even more, spend more time and energy on building long-term and sustainable people and relationship strategies, and continue to deliver overall results. I also feel that the work we started with our strategic plan refresh will build on this, allow us to take on more key projects and opportunities, allow us to grow as a team, as an organization, and continue to serve the communities and support our communication that our citizens expect in the regional district. So thanks for your time today, and if you have any comments, feedback, or questions, I'd be glad to take them.
Director Singh.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Hildebrand. I want to identify what might be a big problem I think we can solve. But before I do that, I want to talk about some of the appreciation that I have for just the level of work that goes into that, and it reflects also in the regional growth strategy monitoring report we'll see later on in the agenda, which I think is a fantastic piece of information. The problem that I see is around, you had in your word salad there, the word challenging, feel like challenging work, but it didn't appear at all in any of the next chart. And so, innovation, we're not known to be innovative. We're not known to really challenge ourselves sometimes in the local government sector. And I think that's a problem. I think we really have to figure out how to lean forward into some of these issues. We've struggled at the board here around regional economic development for as long as I've been around here, and probably much longer. We struggle around lots of other things that we could probably work on together in a better way, but sometimes we don't allow ourselves the opportunity enough to blue sky, or to even in fact fail sometimes. And so the innovation agenda, I don't know where that sits, but I think that's really important for us to try and really push. And I think from a board perspective, from someone who, we all represent the whole region, there's intractable issues that keep on coming up and come up, and we don't seem to be able to. And those are for every RD across the whole province. I'm not talking this is a TRD specific thing, but wouldn't it be great if we had some sort of way of kind of leaning forward to some of those things in a better way? And I don't see that at all in any of the information you provided today, to be quite frank. And I think that's a gap. So I wanted to provide that to you as some feedback.
Yeah, Ms. Sell.
Sorry, if I can just, I just want to add a little bit of clarity. First off, I totally agree. And that was one of the things that did come up in the performance management working group. The employees said, how do we get, they were looking at it as initiative and innovation, or challenging the status quo in there. So they identified that kind of from the performance management side. But the piece I wanted to clarify was that it actually does show up, but it shows up under exceptional public service. because when the staff were starting to talk about what did they mean by challenging work, they said they meant that they challenge themselves to be exceptional when they provide service. And so it doesn't quite get at the innovation side, because I think that's a whole other piece, but they kind of defined it as exceptional. And so they put that exceptional as being the descriptor on the public service for the challenging work.
Yeah, and I think that we have to be more specific around the innovation challenge. I mean, I did this at UBCM, like we didn't even have in some of our staff stuff is we had like risk averse because we have to watch our butt and all sorts of different things in this world. But where do we actually figure out how to be innovative? Because we still have long-standing issues that we keep on hitting our head against, and there's no way we're going to actually fix them unless we actually try new things. And I don't know whether staff and the board is really ready to we don't have a framework for that. And that needs to be, I think, put into our whole operation.
Thank you for those
Mr.
comments. Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for those comments, and certainly something that I have thought a lot about, and I think there's work in progress and more to come, more discussions to have.
Thank you. Are there any other questions for Mr. Hildebrand or Ms. Sell? Director Rothenberger.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. This might be outside of what you're trying to accomplish with your overview there, but every once in a while I get asked a question about why the TNRD has done something 20 years ago, 25 years ago. Why was a decision made in such a way? What is the documentation for a decision? Might be a zoning matter or a land use contract matter, whatever, and we don't have the answer. The answer comes back, well, there are no records anymore of that, so we can't answer that question. The records of it are gone. So unless you have an administrator who's been here for 40 years or whatever, who remembers why something was done, then the rationale for it disappears, which I think would tend to affect what is our perception of ourselves and what are we trying to do and where did we come from and why are we where we're at today? Could you comment on that at all?
Yeah, thank you, Director Rothenberger. I would agree with you. I know part of our strategic planning session that we did, we talked a lot about dynamic communication and branding and trying to explain why and what we do. And we have an opportunity to do a better job at records management and trying to ensure that we have that institutional knowledge in a way that we can use going forward and have that be able to reflect back a decade ago on how we did things, because I'm certainly seeing what you're explaining. I've seen that in a lot of instances, but I think we got a long ways to go, and I think we just need to set the right groundwork going forward to ensure that we can start communicating differently to our citizens and making sure that we're answering those questions about that you explained on what and when and how and why we do things.
Director Elliott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Following Director Rothenberger's question, do we not ever keep records from like 1967 and onwards?
Yeah.
I can speak to that because records management is part of my department. So there's records retention schedules and requirements in terms of what types of documents you keep and for how long you keep them. And that's something that I need to turn my attention to, being fairly new here, to see what we've done in the past and what we want to do going forward. But some documents we would have, it may be a mystery where some of them are stored or archived, but some documents we're not required to keep. And given the limited space that we have, oftentimes if we don't need to keep certain paper records, then we will dispose of them.
Well, that's kind of like saying, after 7 years, you don't need to keep your income tax either. But God help you if somebody comes along in the 8th year and says, where's your stuff? Because, you need to have that background. And I'm just astonished that, like, I can think of all kinds of things in the last 25 years that should be in the records, not just a statistical thing, but how we made a decision that maybe wasn't really good from the public's point of view, and we stood behind it. If we have nothing that could say that, I mean, I'm astonished. I'm totally astonished.
Well, Director, I know we do have minutes and agendas and board reports going back quite far. I don't know how far back, but we definitely have records of decision making at the board level.
Right, and I do know that many years ago, we used to, the discussions, some of the discussions that went around a topic was put in the minutes, but we don't do that anymore.
Thanks, Ms. Campbell. I have one quick question, Ms. Sell, and that was with respect to the grievances, BCGEU 2020. It seemed to be an unusually high number. And I'm just wondering if that had anything to do with the COVID restrictions and people having to work from home and that sort of thing. Was COVID partly responsible for that?
No, there was just an unusual number of grievances that came forward from the BCGEU, and many of them were very procedural, where they were looking at the collective agreement and, you know, kind of questioning how some of the procedures that were being done, like how vacation is calculated, for example. That's one grievance that we've got. So they're very procedural, those ones that we've received last year.
Okay, thanks very much. It's 3:50. Oh, I'm sorry, Director Rain.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask the question on personnel side. Do we do exit interviews with all of the people who retire? And obviously they shouldn't be part of the report you're presenting to us, but I trust that yourself and the CAO would see all of the exit interviews.
Yeah, especially if we lose you know, one of our talented people, will often, and it's not a clear case of, you know, we had one person who moved to Denmark. We still will talk to them on how we can improve. And that's sometimes even done by the department. But yes, whenever we lose someone that's, you know, key, we will definitely talk to them.
Thank you. The screen that I'm looking at is pretty limited in terms of people that I can see. So if there's anybody out in the Zoom world who wishes to speak up, has a question for Mr. Hildebrand or Ms. Sell, please speak. Hearing none, I will thank you for that presentation and bringing us up to date. I think this state of the organization is a good idea, and I'm glad you've initiated it. And the other thing is, it's 3:15. It looks like we've got a fairly substantial portion of the agenda still to get through. Is there any appetite for brief adjournment, say 10 minutes until 3:25? That notion seems to have met with favor, so let's take a break. Yes, this is actually me under the mask. And we are now at 912, the Vavenby Community Water System, and there is a recommendation. Is there any discussion? All in favor? Any opposed? That's carried. That takes us to the UBCM Committee on Emergency Management. There's a recommendation. Moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? Director Singh.
Yeah, Mr. Before I was just hoping we could, before we got to a motion, we got a motion that's fine now, but I actually co-chair this committee. And it's a committee that I've been involved with right from the beginning. I chatted with Mr. Story before the meeting, and the thought is that we would actually, because there's a couple of things. One is that the committee is dealing with, the committee we have now is dealing with Emergency Practices Act updates. So we're working on helping the province, and that's been very good consultation around that. The issue that's arisen is that there's some things the province is doing in the interim around the emergency practices as it works right now, they're not consulting on. And so what I'm suggesting is it possible for us to talk with UBCM and find out the right place to do this? Because a UBCM standing committee is right now there's a standing committee that actually the Flood and Wildfire Committee report to, which is a community safety committee, and that's part of their work plan. Emergency management is a really big piece that's developing, and so maybe we want to have a committee. But before we just go and sign a letter, what I'm wondering is whether we can maybe talk to some of the UBCM staff and folks there to kind of see what the best way of doing it is, right? Because this was raised briefly, I think, at the committee level And that's why I was late for our last TNRE meeting, actually, is because I was on this committee meeting. That's my thoughts. I'm not really, I would suggest us not to write a letter right now to UBCM to ask for this. I would suggest for us to, I can give staff the contacts with the UBCM staff. We could talk to the UBCM executive members and just kind of see where this best would fit. And the real issue right now is not really the structure of the committee. It's really around consultation with emergency management staff on. Right now, it's on financial assistance guide is actually the big problem right now. They changed some of those numbers, and we want to make sure that that doesn't happen again. That has been flagged. It was flagged at the committee level in December, and our contacts at the NBC were saying, yeah, we'll take it to the people that we know there, and that should never happen. So, but I was wondering about the best way of doing that, because I think the letter may be a little premature and might surprise UBCM, maybe not, but that's my sense.
Thank you, Ms. Campbell.
Well, we have a motion on the floor that should probably be dealt with unless Director Elliott wants to withdraw moving it.
No,
Was it
was Director Elliott, did you move the recommendation?
Yeah.
Okay, did you wish to withdraw?
No. Okay.
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, when I read a little bit of the report, I thought to myself that if it was a standing committee, it would have a little more leg to stand on. And by what I've just heard Director Singh say, I think they need a little more leg to stand on. So maybe we should just pass it and let the UBCM know what we're thinking.
Director Singh?
As much as I respect Director Elliott, I think that, because I'm actually co-chairing this committee, I had no idea this was coming to the board. So it's important for us to be able to give people a bit of a heads up as to what the concerns are, and to work it through a process. I'm not saying that eventually we would not have a standing committee at UBCM, but those things take some time to actually work through a bird process. If the board wants a letter, I got no problem with it. You have someone on the board, on that board and on that committee that actually sits there and co-chairs it. So I'm just offering myself as a bit of a assistance to kind of make this work in the best possible way. And that's all I would say.
Okay, well, having heard that, is there any further discussion with respect to the motion? Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed, if any? I would say it's carried.
Confirm, since we need to record, who opposed? Director Singh, Director Rothenberger, Director Kershaw?
I'll support it. No problem.
So you're not opposed? Okay, so Director Kershaw, Director Rothenberger opposed. Chair Gillis?
I opposed it. Okay, I was hoping that we could, I was just hoping that if it were defeated, then then we could look at it and defer, but apparently that's not the case, so it's been passed. That takes us to road rescue. Is there any discussion? All in favor? Opposed? Grant application for upgrades to the Vavenby Blackpool fire halls. Is there any discussion? All in favor? Opposed? It's carried. Is there any discussion? All in favor? Opposed, if any? It's carried.
We're not hearing the mover or the seconder online. Can people speak directly into the mics, please, so we can hear? Thank you.
Thank you. TNRD Civic Building Upgrades Grant Application. There is a recommendation.
Second.
Is there any discussion? Director Rothenberger.
Just a question about the report itself and what's covered in it, and not regarding the roof, but regarding the boardroom. Has any discussion been held about the possibility of a central or a collective facility that the three local levels of government could use and spread the cost around, such as is being done with this room now, so that the TNRD could use it, the city could use it, the school board could use it, and lower the cost for all parties. Is that possible or feasible, or has it been discussed?
Mr. Hildebrand?
Thank you. Through the chair to Director Rothenberg, not to my knowledge, I know we obviously are in collaboration working in this venue right now, but haven't talked about a new or separate venue to actually explore that partnership.
Well, okay, I guess I'll leave it with you to think about, and other members of the board as well. It was raised earlier, not through a motion, but just as an idea that might be considered.
Yeah, Director Rothenberger, and I think there have been suggestions with respect to a new building and so on. This motion that's before us right now is just to get our application in case we're going ahead one way or the other. Is that correct, Ms. Campbell?
That's correct. This is specific to applying for the grant for the repairs to the building, which would be required regardless, from my understanding. But we can certainly have a conversation and explore future opportunities for a shared building or shared space.
Thank you. Director Quinn.
Is there a time limit on this, Mr. Chairman? Or Mr. Hildebrand, is there a time limit on this application?
If I could ask Mr. Dalglish through the chair to speak to the timeline, that would be helpful.
Yes, thank you. Mr. Dalglish.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, Director Quinn, there is a timeline. It is sensitive. The application does have to be in by the end of January. So again, just to relay Ms. Campbell's comment, this is just seeking approval for the application itself, not for the actual work to happen.
Thank you, Director Elliott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Hildebrand, no matter whether we get this application grant or not, whether we get the grant or not, it's probably time for us to have a discussion about our building and where we're going with it and who owns part of it, because I do know that the city owns 25% of it, and we have outgrown it. So I think the board needs to have a day with our committee of the whole meetings in the next 6 months or so, to see if we're where we all want to go with it.
Mr. Hildebrand.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. To the Director Elliott, we certainly can have that discussion, and we will make sure we do. If I could speak just to the overgrowing the facility. I don't believe that's the case quite yet. With some of the changes that we're thinking about, I know prior to me joining the organization, there was a motion about the new library and research, like looking for that land and looking for that location, which is in the works right now. And we hope to bring something to the board in the first quarter. But with that being said, we also have a library contingent on the 3rd floor in our current facility right now, that with that new facility, we'll be transferring that, I guess, that role and that those people to the North Kamloops building, and which will allow us much more space and allow us to grow, including using the boardroom in a way that we're constantly fighting and for meeting space right now. And we can use that whole half of that 3rd floor for other expansion and other growth in the future. So I would still say we have a number of years of growth ahead of us.
Thank you. Is there any further discussion on recommendation number 1? Director Singh.
Sorry, I just wanted to ask about whether the work is important enough that we would do it without the grant funding in terms of some of the replacements of the roof and that kind of thing.
Yes, Director Singh. So some of the work is going to happen regardless of the grant success or not. So this is just an opportunity to get more of it done quicker. So Mr. Ray has put some budget monies aside to fix some of the more higher priority issues with the building. But again, this was just an opportunity that was presented that, we could go for more at a quicker pace.
Maybe just another question on its head. Which parts are grant dependent? Because I mean, obviously it's our asset. We should be maintaining it. Obviously, grant funding is great to get. We should try and go for it. If we don't get the grant funding, will there be parts that we won't do?
Yes, it'll be phased out over a multi-year program as opposed to all at once. So as an example, the roof, instead of doing the whole roof at one time, it would be done over, 4 or 5 years kind of type, yeah.
Thanks.
Thanks, Mr. Dalglish. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor of recommendation number 1? Opposed, if any? It's carried. There's a second recommendation and a third, folks. Moved by Director Elliott and seconded by Director Blackwell. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed, if any?
Move 3.
Carried.
Second 3.
Moved and seconded. Is there any discussion on recommendation number 3? Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed, if any? It's carried. Regional Growth Strategy Monitoring Report, there's a recommendation. Moved by Director Singh, seconded by Director Schaefer.
Move it.
Is there any discussion? All in favor? Opposed, if any? It's carried. Board Correspondence Policy, there's a recommendation.
Second.
Seconded by Director Elliott. Is there any discussion? Seeing none. All
Mr. Chair,
pardon?
this is Director Stamer.
Oh, okay, sorry. Couldn't see you there.
Long time no talk to.
Yeah.
Happy New Year, everybody. I have a question in regards on the correspondence part of this, right? We're talking about the correspondence coming to the board, correct?
That's correct.
So where does it say in here when it talks about the privacy end of things, and it talked about beginning, I believe, on page 3, where it talked about inappropriate letters will not be brought forth to the board, and that is under the discretion of staff. And then we get down to privacy. So where is the point of, if somebody has a legitimate concern, they've written that concern, maybe they feel that hasn't been properly addressed by staff, where does the board come in being able to receive that information in writing?
Ms. Campbell.
So, and maybe it's not clear, and I'm open to recommendations to make it clear, but the policy states that a matter that's operational in nature will go to staff to deal with from a customer service perspective, but it will still go on the agenda. So that section is referred to under correspondence to be included on a meeting agenda. So it will still be on the agenda.
But it says, thank you for that, but it also says if it is not operational in nature, it can go to closed. It does not say that if it's operational, it can go to closed. It says it has to be non-operational to go to closed. Should that be changed?
Ms. Campbell.
I have to take a closer look at the policy, but my understanding is there's nothing that refers to closed, except that closed meeting items wouldn't be, anything under the community charter wouldn't be, anything under the section of the community charter that deals with closed meeting matters wouldn't be added to an open agenda. Maybe I'm not understanding what Director Stamer.
Well, what I'm saying is that on the privacy on number 18, it says correspondence submitted to the corporate officer related to a matter under section 90 of the community charter that is not operational in nature will be considered at a closed meeting. Does that mean that if it is not operational in nature, it cannot come to a closed meeting?
Well, presumably something that would be operational in nature wouldn't fall under, not that I can think of the top of my head, something that would be covered off under section 90 of the community charter. It tends to be more legal matters, personnel, employee related matters, service negotiations at a level that the board would be discussing, not staff level. But
Right, but is there a way that it can be? That's what I'm asking. Does that mean that we still have an opportunity if we want to bring those matters up and close, we still can?
You can bring it up in closed if it's operational in nature, but it meets one of the requirements under the community charter for a closed meeting. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you. Is there Director Rain?
Just a question on inappropriate correspondence. Where does that go and who's the judge?
Ms. Campbell?
Trying to pull this up on my screen. So I believe that's a discussion between myself, the chair, and the CAO. Director Rain, do you have the section in front of you?
I don't have the numbers because it's sorry, but it's in that same section that Director was talking
It's
about.
on page 3.
Any inappropriate correspondence about board members or TNRD staff will not be placed on the agenda. You know, just I understand that. It's a question of there probably should be some clarification of that would be judged by the CAO and chair and corporate officer, or
So that's what it says. It says at the discretion of the any inappropriate, offensive, misleading, harassing, or threatening correspondence will not be acknowledged or circulated at the discretion of the chair, and I don't know myself, and will be brought to the attention of the chair. And where required, threatening or harassing correspondence that poses a potential safety risk would be forwarded to the RCMP. Does that answer your question, Director Rain?
actually, I'm not sure where you are there on that.
So it's number 20. It's number 20.
Let me, sorry. Yeah. 20, it's on page 3. Yeah.
It's on page 7, Director Rain.
Yeah, okay. No, if that's their clarification, fine. Thanks.
Thanks, Director Rain, or the Director Singh.
Just a quick question around the correspondence addressed to the chair and the board. So even, I mean, I guess sometimes people send emails to chair and board and don't expect it to be on the agenda, like a member of the public. So it doesn't really say that here. It doesn't talk about, you know, if people wanted to appear on the agenda, that's obviously something that they should be able to do, I suppose. But if they don't really mind, or they don't, I mean, are we going to have a screen of that sort?
So, and I think I mentioned this in the report, what we've been doing is following up with authors and asking them and advising them that the default is that it's going to go on the agenda, because that was the feedback that I heard from board members last meeting. So that's the default. But I respond to the writers and advise them that unless otherwise indicated by them, that their email and their letter will be placed on the agenda. So we do check with them. And if someone said that they didn't want it on the agenda, then we wouldn't put it on the agenda.
Okay. And it doesn't sound like there's not a massive volume of correspondence that comes through. So like we wouldn't have like a lot of letters every agenda, I don't imagine. Okay.
No, and we're also, and I mentioned this in the report, going to update our website so that it's a little more clear to the public where they can direct correspondence to, and giving some information that it will appear on the agenda. Unless they don't want it to, then they should follow up and advise that they don't want it on the agenda.
Director Elliott?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I thought, Ms. Campbell, that one of the ideas was that when we started this conversation, was that we wanted to make sure that the directors had the correspondence before the public did. So that if somebody writes a letter directly about an EA's area, whether it be planning or any other thing, it would go to that director before it goes to the board. Is that not right?
Well, there is a section in here that deals with, I don't know if the word is urgent, but some more pressing matters. So if someone had a concern in one of your areas and we weren't having another board meeting for another month, then we would circulate that out to the board of directors in advance of the agenda.
But this is what started this conversation all the way around last fall, was that we weren't getting the letters directly related to ours. And I think Director Watson had exactly that point, was because if you don't get it, you don't know what you can deal with.
Mm-hmm. Well, the intention of this policy and the intention of the process that I outlined in the report is that you will all get your correspondence in a timely manner, and it will be placed on the agenda as well. And as I mentioned, if it's a matter that needs to be addressed prior to the board meeting, then we'll certainly ensure that it's circulated before that.
Yeah, because we're only having one board meeting a month now.
Can be challenging.
Lots of things can happen in the rural areas.
Is there any further discussion with respect to the policy? Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed, if any? It's carried. Ministerial order for Black Pine, I think is where we are, is it not? Yeah. There are two recommendations. Director Rothenberger.
I think I can move both those recommendations at the same time, can I not?
You can.
I so move.
Second.
Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed, if any? It's carried. Both recommendations are carried. They are carried. TNRD committee appointments. My goodness, I thought we'd never get to this. We're there. Okay. Okay, so I think the first order would be for me to announce the appointments for those positions that are at chair's discretion, correct?
I believe it's the external committees first.
Oh.
And I believe we have enough interest in positions for the external committees that we don't need to carry out an election, but we still do need to have movers and seconders to appoint those board members to the committee and the alternates as well.
Okay, then the suggestion for the Municipal Finance Authority for the appointee is Director Brown. If somebody wishes to move and second that. Okay, are there any further? Seeing none, I will declare Director Brown appointed. And for the alternate, the suggestion of interest came from Director O'Reilly.
So moved.
Okay, is there any further? Seeing none, I will declare Director O'Reilly appointed as alternate. That takes us to Municipal Insurance Association. There's been an expression of interest from Director Duty. Is there any further, are there any further recommendations? None? I'll declare Director Duty appointed. There has been an expression of interest from Director Roden for the alternate.
So moved.
Are there any further recommendations? None? I will declare Director Roden appointed as alternate for the Municipal Insurance Corporation. This takes us to the Community Energy Association. Director Blackwell has expressed interest.
So moved.
Second. Any others? Seeing none, Director Blackwell is appointed as the appointee, and the alternate has some interest in the alternate has been expressed by Director Schaefer.
So second.
Moved and seconded. Any further suggestions? Seeing none, I will declare Director Schaefer appointed alternate. That brings us to the Shuswap Watershed Council. I thought just about said the Shushed Water Swap Council, but we okay. It's been suggested that Director Christian would be interested in the position. Any others? Seeing none, I'll declare Director Christian appointed, and as an from Chase, Director Crow has expressed interest.
Sorry.
Any others? Seeing none, Director Crow, you are appointed. Does that mean, Ms. Campbell, that I can get on with the chair's appointments?
You can. I've been advised that this is my error in the report, that the Fraser Basin Council, while it's an external committee, is actually a chair-appointed committee. So I believe Chair Gillis has a list of those he's appointed to that committee.
All right, Director Rothenberger, your mic's on. I just wondered if you were going to speak.
Apologies.
Okay, so for the audit committee, directors Quinn, Rain, and Christian are appointed. For the Economic Development and Recreation Committee, directors Schaefer, Rothenberger, Graham, Laird, and Elliott. And from the smaller municipalities, Director Stamer, Director Roden. From the City of Kamloops, Director Duty. Emergency Management, Director Laird, Director Rothenberger, Director Graham, Director Watson. From the smaller municipalities, Director Stamer, Director Brown, and Director Smith. From the City of Kamloops, Director O'Reilly. Invasive Plant Management, Director Kershaw, Director Graham, and Director Roden. Regional Solid Waste Management, Director Watson, Director Schaefer, Director Rothenberger, and Director Elliott. From the municipalities, other than Kamloops, Director Talarico, Director Polderman, and Director Swan. And from the City of Kamloops, Director Sinclair. For utilities, Director Quinn, Director Elliott, Director Schaefer, Director Kershaw, Director Rice. And from the municipality other than Kamloops, Directors Smith and Director Roden. From the City of Kamloops, Director Singh. And for Fraser Basin Council, Director Rice, and as an alternate, Director Duty. And I think that's the full list, is it not, Ms. Campbell? Did I miss any?
I don't believe so.
Good. Okay, that takes us to the year 2020 building permit summary and December activity report.
Move to receive for information.
Moved and seconded by Director Elliott. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed, if any? It's carried. Committees. There are nobody. Oh, there are some where people have been appointed. I see. Yeah. Okay.
We left them blank, Chair Gillis, because we left them blank in anticipation of having new committee members and new chairs on the committees.
Okay.
But the former chairs can speak to them if
Can
you'd like.
speak to them. Okay. Audit committee.
I would move that we receive the December 17th committee minutes and December 10th closed audit committee meeting minutes, and they're released. Thank you.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor? Opposed, if any? That's carried. Anything further, Director Rain?
No, sir.
Economic Development and Recreation Services.
No meeting, no report.
Emergency Management and Protective Services.
No meeting, no report.
Thank you. Regional Solid Waste Management.
No meeting, no report.
Thompson-Nicola Invasive Plant Management Committee.
No meeting, the next meeting will be in January, this month, 12th, I believe it is. February.
I hope
Pardon
not.
me. February. February. Pardon me. We missed the last one.
Thompson Regional Hospital District Director Christian.
No meeting, no report.
Utilities Systems Committee.
No meeting, no report.
Thompson Headwater Services Director
Thank
Quinn.
you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to point, the recommendation is that Shelley Tobin and Darrell McCrae be reappointed to the Thompson Headwater Services Committee representing Ebola for 2-year terms ending December 31st, 2022, and that Lee Onslow be reappointed to the Thompson Headwaters Services Committee representing Blue River for a 2-year term ending December 31, 22. I so move.
Any discussion? All in favor? Opposed, if any? It's carried. Wells Gray Services Director Schaefer.
I'd like to move the 2 recommendations that Hazel Wadliger be reappointed to the Joint Services Committee for a term of 1 year ending December 31st, 2021, and that Hazel Wadliger be reappointed to the Tourism Wells Gray Association Board for a 1-year term ending December 31st, 2021.
Any discussion? All in favor? Opposed, if any? It's carried. Joint Services Committee Director Schaefer.
There was a meeting January the 11th, and the minutes will be following.
Thank you. External Committees Fraser Basin Council.
Thank you. Two meetings this week. One on Tuesday with the local chapter, and the 2 new items that came up were food security and mental health. And at the op meeting this morning at 9 o'clock for the entire board, we brought that up as far as further discussion at Fraser Basin with the rising mental health issue with COVID and food security, and there will be minutes to follow.
Thanks, Director Rice. Municipal Finance Authority. Director Brown.
Yeah, no meeting, no report.
Municipal Insurance Association.
Nothing to report.
Shuswap Watershed Council.
No meeting, no report.
Kamloops Airport Authority.
I'll turn that over to Director Christian.
Thank you, Vice Chair Kershaw. The only news is that unfortunately Air Canada has decided to suspend service out of Kamloops Airport indefinitely. That is difficult for us because it's the only connection to Vancouver, and it is a main source of both business traffic as well as tourism traffic into this region. So as a result, we are courting Pacific Coastal Airlines as well as Central Mountain Air, who used to actually have a 1-day-a-week service to Vancouver, seeing if they're interested. And we've been talking to WestJet about their service and whether or not there's a potential for their Calgary Kamloops service to be extended to Vancouver as well. So we're going to have our next meeting in, I believe it's in February, and we should have some traction on those asks by then.
Thanks, Director Christian, and I can tell you I don't envy you with trying to keep planes flying in and out of Kamloops under these conditions. Federation of Canadian Municipalities, Director Singh.
No meeting, no report. Next meeting, I'll report.
Thank you. Community Energy Association.
No report.
Okay, correspondence. We have action requested Thompson Valley Charters with respect to bus service in North Thompson Valley.
I'd like to make a motion that we send a letter of support, Mr. Chair.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? All in favor? Opposed, if any? That's carried. Ashcroft Hub Society wants some help.
Director Roden here. I'd like to move that the TNRD board send a letter of support to the Ashcroft Hub Society regarding the former Ashcroft Elementary School property.
Moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? Director Singh.
What's the letter of support for? It's for them keeping the, I'm not really clear as to what actually we're supporting here. I'm sorry, my own fault.
Director Roden.
Yes, I can speak to that. Thank you. My computer is also unstable, so if I cut out, it's because my computer is unstable. The Ashcroft Hub property was formerly the Ashcroft Elementary School. It closed in 2015. Since then, the Hub Society has leased it from School District 74. At its January 5th meeting, the Board of Trustees of SD 74 decided to proceed with the disposal process for the Ashcroft Elementary School property. There is considerable consternation in the community and the region that this might mean an end to the Ashcroft Hub, and the Hub Society, which has been operating it as a community facility since August 2015, is looking for support so that with discussions with the school district, the hope, I believe, is that the school district will look favorably at disposing of the property to the Hub Society at a nominal fee rather than listing it at fair market value.
That's helpful because I always a little careful around getting into school districts, you know, world and work. So I just want to make sure that we're not, that it's a friendly letter, not saying that they have to keep it, because we've had that problem a few times and it's not very pleasant when we get into matches with our school district colleagues.
No, School District 74 has disposed of several properties in the district before. Two that come to mind are the Spence's Bridge Elementary School, which was sold to the Spence's Bridge Improvement District for, I believe, $1. And the Venables Valley School, when it closed, it was similarly sold to the Venables Valley community, again, I believe, for $1. So there is precedent within School District 74 for selling their properties at an extremely nominal fee to a suitable community organization.
Thanks, Director Roden. Is there any further discussion? Director Rothenberger.
Just another question. In what manner might the TNRD be active in community consultation on this matter?
The Board of Education of School District 74 has reached out to the villages of Ashcroft, Cache Creek, and Clinton, the Bonaparte, Cooksbury, and Ashcroft Indian bands, and the Hub Society, asking if they want to have a Zoom meeting with the Board of Trustees to discuss the disposal process. I would suspect that the TNRD would be able to request that same thing. I will just note that residents of areas E, I, J, and the municipalities of Ashcroft, Cache Creek, and Clinton, and Kamloops, the city of Kamloops, have all used and make use of the hub. The TNRD has also made use of it. I think the most recent example I can recall is in 2019, when there was a public consultation process regarding the site of a proposed eco depot between Ashcroft and Cache Creek, and the hub was used by the TNRD to have public meetings and hold information sessions.
Thanks, Director Roden. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed, if any? That's carried. Finally, the City of Kamloops request for a letter of support for a funding application to the Clean BC Organics Infrastructure and Coalition and Collection Program. Is there any discussion? All in favor? Opposed, if any? That's carried. We have a number of letters for information only. Has it been seconded? No, it's seconded by Director Singh. Director Watson.
Can you mic, please? Sorry.
11.2.11 is a letter from Dan Zizik in our correspondence. In it, he took a picture of the water that comes out of his tap in Loon Lake. I think that I sincerely hope that this comes to the attention of our utilities committee and gets discussed as soon as possible. I can't imagine how a taxpayer would feel having this water coming out of their taps and it being put on a water meter.
Thank
Mr.
you.
Hildebrand.
Thank you, Chair Gillis. I know Mr. Devlin would like to just speak to this because I know we've spoken to Mr. Zizek a number of times and explained the situation. I'm hoping that perhaps Jake can provide more information.
Thank you, Mr. Devlin.
Mr. Chairman, on a point of order, normally if we want to take it out of for information only, we move a letter out for discussion. And I would so move that letter be brought to the floor out of correspondence for information.
Moved and seconded. Is there any discussion on that? Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed, if any?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Director Quinn.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'd like to speak to the question with regards to water quality. There were a number of issues raised by Mr. Zizek, but to the point of water quality, the Loon Lake system uses a combination of surface and groundwater, and the groundwater component in the supply has a significant manganese constituent in the water. And what happens when you chlorinate the water with the manganese, and this is not uncommon, is over time, the manganese will precipitate out. Now, in the Loon Lake community water system, there's a significant number of customers that are seasonal, and therefore the services and some of the lines, the lateral lines, sit for potentially weeks or months without flow. And when that happens, there's certainly the possibility of significant precipitation of the manganese. And that's why the customers, if their services have been unused for a significant period of time, can have quite dirty looking water. All that's required is to run the service to flush it out. And we also flush our distribution mains out on that system to address the same issue. And to that point, in November, we installed a new piece of equipment. We're still fine tuning it. It's an automated flusher unit, which will help not the entire system, but one of the longest dead end legs on it. So we're working to help alleviate that issue as well.
Thanks, Mr. Devlin. Does that address your question, Director Watson?
I once again said that I hope that this would come to the Utilities Committee at their first meeting. I move that we take it to the Utilities Committee at their first meeting.
Any discussion on that motion? All in favor? Opposed, if any? That's carried. So we're back to, I think, the motion with respect to the for information. Oh, sorry, Director Quinn, Director Singh.
You promoted me. Thank you. I was actually asking about the letter from the District of Logan Lake, because it's like there's a request here for a reconsideration of a program, which is a request. So I wonder if staff have something different in there, or if Mayor Smith has anything, or Director Smith has anything she wants to add. But that's, for me, not information. That's actually a request to the board, and obviously we can approve it or deny it, but I just wanted to put that out there in terms of a question as to why that's information.
Mr. Hildebrand.
Okay.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Staff also discussed this one. Mr. Devlin could provide a response that's hopefully good for the board.
Do we have to pull this one from the, do we need a motion to pull this letter then from the information only?
Just procedurally, the board can't reconsider this matter. So the wording of the letter, and I was in discussions with their corporate officer, we said we'd share the concerns with the board, and then I'll turn it over to Mr. Devlin because he can speak to what his thoughts on how he can address this with Logan Lake.
Mr. Devlin.
Yeah, we just, Chair, thank you for that. I just wanted to suggest to the board, at the board's pleasure, we could direct staff to share with the District of Logan Lake and the member municipalities the report that was brought to the Solid Waste Committee on October 14th, which outlined several options for consideration and the recommendation that was subsequently supported by the committee and the board.
Thank you. Director Singh? Director Smith?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate it. And thank you, Mr. Devlin, for your response. Yeah, this I did bring this out in my report to council after it came through the process at the TNRD board level. And they were adamant that they wanted to have a letter forwarded to have the board reconsider the removal of that as an option. So I was of two minds when the decision was made, because I understand the business case and the cost of the program, but at the same time, I also know that this is a well-utilized program, not just in Logan Lake, but in a lot of small communities. So they're very, very eager to see this program continue on. So I think that it would be helpful to have the report forwarded so that we can circulate it to other members of council so they fully understand the scope of the work and the decision that was made. So thank you to staff for doing that. And I appreciate the motion for, or sorry, the Director Singh for bringing that forward for me.
Thank you, Director Smith. And that is in the works, I gather, Mr. Devlin, is it, that the report will be forwarded to all the municipalities, correct?
Yes, we will certainly do that. Yeah.
Thank you. I think.
Point of order, Mr. Chair. Director Stamer, I'd like to make a motion to pull the 11-2-12 Kamloops Amateur Radio Club request for support, and make a motion to that effect, that we send a letter supporting their club.
Okay, moved and seconded that that the Kamloops Amateur Radio Club letter be removed from the information only category, and that we send a letter of support. Is there any discussion? Mr. Hildebrand.
Thank you, Chair Gillis. Just to that question, I did have a conversation with this gentleman today, and the letter came to me directly. I thought it was important to put it on here because it did talk to a lot of the services and the great work that they do for the entire regional district. So that's why it was on there. They are going to come back at the appropriate time and perhaps do a delegation and specifically ask for grant money and those sorts of things. So that is in the works, but although it was addressed to me, I still wanted the board to see it. If that answers your question, Director Stamer.
Thanks, Mr. Hildebrand, but I was just reading in there that they were looking for that letter of support for their gaming grant application, and I wasn't aware of when that application was going to take place. That's why I believe that we should have sent a letter of support regardless.
I'm fine with that, and I'm having a conversation tomorrow with both folks that I've connected with.
Thank you.
So it's moved and seconded that that we send a letter of support. Is there any further discussion? Director Elliott.
Not to be a bugbear, but don't we have a policy that says we don't answer support letters on the day it comes to us?
Actually, I had a discussion just recently with Mr. Hildebrand and Ms. Campbell, and the consensus seems to be that these matters that can be dealt with on the spot should be dealt with on the spot, but that when we have delegations appear before us requesting funding or grants, that those should be put off to the following meeting. But this is not a delegation. This is simply a letter.
Then I'll support Director Stamer.
Thank you. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed, if any? That's carried. New business from members. Director Watson.
Thank you. Very strangely, after being in this position for 18 years, I've finally figured out how to become a director on the board of Hat Creek Ranch. I apparently need to be appointed from this board to sit on the board of Hat Creek Ranch. And this apparently is the way that our member municipalities get on this board. And so I'm asking if Steve Rice and I could be appointed to sit on the Hat Creek Ranch Board at the favor of this board.
I'll make that motion.
Second.
So that's moved and seconded. Is there any, I must say, I'm left a little bit puzzled, but that's not the first time in my life. Moved and seconded. Is there any discussion?
Welcome aboard, directors.
Director Elliott.
Mr. Chairman, does that include expenses?
I don't believe that this includes expenses, although if I wanted to, I could claim that as a recreation, out of my recreation. This is an unpaid board, and I will need a letter written from the TNRD to the Hat Creek Board, letting them know who is appointed for this.
Thanks, Director Watson. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Anyone opposed? It's carried. Director Quinn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. At our last meeting, we adopted bylaw 2700, which was a new community plan for the North Thompson. That was a long process. All the communities were involved. Importantly, the Simp First Nation took part. And I'm not quite sure how you do this, but I would like to ask staff to investigate the possibility of nominating the planning department for an award through Ubcm. I would so move.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? Director Singh.
Maybe, hopefully this time when I speak, I might have more success, but I think it's a good idea. And I also think that, well, I served on the UBCM Community Excellence Awards judging committee for a number of years, and that hasn't come up for quite some time, so that's good timing. And I'm just trying to pull up the actual categories. I don't think we have, I don't think there's actually a, I don't know there's actually a category for planning as such, but there's definitely categories that might fit into. So I just wanted to endorse that and offer some help in terms of figuring out the process.
Thank you. Is there any further discussion?
Through the chair to Director Singh, thank you. I'm not quite sure what fits there. I know that it happens later in the year, and that's why I've asked staff to have an investigation on it, on what's the best thing to do. I think it's important, particularly seeing the Simp First Nation. We're really active partners in this, and it's reaching out. Thank you.
Is there any further discussion? All in favor? Opposed, if any? That's carried. Thanks, Director Quinn. Is there any further new business from members? Seeing none, that takes us to a notice of motion, of which there is none. We have a question period. Are there any, have any questions been directed to us? Ms. Campbell?
No, Chair Gillis, there have not.
Thank you. I will, thanks to some instructions from Ms. Campbell, I will now then ask for a motion to adjourn the open meeting.
Well,
So moved.
a motion, just a motion to move into a closed meeting after we'll do the motion to close the meeting first and then we'll adjourn. Because it has to be passed in an open meeting. So someone move 15, yeah.
Second.
Okay, any discussion? All in favor? We're moving into a closed meeting.
And now you can adjourn.
And now I will entertain a motion to adjourn the open meeting.
Moved.
Moved and seconded. And we stand adjourned. So, and we also